Terry Gregory was 19 and murdered in Woolwich in 2003.
George Edwin.
A 65-year-old black man stood trial and admitted carrying a knife on the night of the murder. He also admitted looking for Terry after an earlier altercation, but was not convicted. It was decided there was insufficient evidence. Terry's mother said she felt in the same position as Doreen Lawrence, the mother of Stephen Lawrence. The prosecution tried to insinuate that Terry Gregory may have had a racist tendency, but there was no evidence to support this, not a scrap. It's unlikely this case will ever be progressed, and there is no media outcry to find Terry Gregory's killers.
I've called it Only Black Lives Matter because you've probably all heard of, Black Lives Matter, which is the American thing. But this is Only Black Lives Matter because that's how it seems to me when there's a mixed race murder. So, as you all know, there's a glaring difference in the way the media report on white on black crime. Default is it's a racist crime, that's if it's white on black. And black on white, the default is it's just a crime. Race is kept out of it. Where a defendant is non-white, it's all too easy to deny murder with a claim of racism. The media rushed to report at length any perceived racist murder while more or less ignoring white victims of non-white violence. Then, to compound the injustice, they will demonise any support offered to white victims by what they call right-wing groups as stirring up hatred, when all the while they continually stir up hatred themselves with their non-stop references to the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. The result of this is that the grieving white families are isolated from their only source of support. Our genuine wish to help is guaranteed to be made toxic by the media. The legal fraternity will argue against deporting a foreign criminal back to his home country in case he may not receive a fair trial, while we natives can't get a fair trial in our own country despite our supposedly superior legal system. I would like to speak of just such a case and highlight what I see as serious flaws in the jury system, and also contrast the different outcomes for the two Greenwich families involved. You spoke a bit about that. I'm certain all of you will have heard of one Greenwich mother, Doreen Lawrence, and her son Stephen, who was murdered in 1993 in a supposed racist killing. But how many of you will have heard of another Greenwich mother, Sue Gregory, whose two sons were murdered by non-natives almost 2 years to the day apart? One perpetrator, West Indian, the second Vietnamese. And for this talk, I want to concentrate on the case of Terry, actually, the first son that was murdered, because there was some justice in the case of Billy, the second son, because the Vietnamese perpetrator did go to prison. So, he was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment in October 2006, although he almost certainly is out by now and free to commit more violent crime, because he had actually attacked another drinker with a glass not long before he murdered Billy Gregory in the same way. Sue Gregory was always at pains to say that the family were not claiming a racist attack in the case of Terry, although all it requires for an attack to be deemed racist is for someone to claim it was so. Terry's murder seems to have almost certainly had some black aggressive elements. The feeling of being disrespected, which seems to be a black thing, especially as this particular this was in front of 3 young black women as well. And who can know what was in the mind of someone when they're committing murder? You know, who's to know what thoughts were going through their heads? And it's all about that, isn't it? Well, unless there was someone there to hear them say, you know, whatever racist comments. Why the disparity of the media and police attention? The CPS were not prepared to seek a third trial in the Gregory case, although they could have, and the evidence appears to have been compelling, while they actually changed the law of double jeopardy in order to pursue Lawrence's murderers. And that case, I believe, goes on to this day. I think they're still after some people on that one, aren't they? Is Doreen Lawrence's grief for her one son any more than Sue Gregory's for her two sons? Simply because one murder was deemed to be racist. I mean, you know, if your son's murdered, can you feel worse because someone's saying it's a racist murder? I don't think so. I was recently reminded, round about Christmas, that 28th of December 2018 marked 15 years since the murder of Terry Gregory, who was 19 at the time. He was murdered in Woolwich in 2003. Terry's mother, Sue, was just getting her life back together again when a tragic quirk of fate saw her elder son, Billy, murdered almost two years to the day afterwards in Woolwich. And that was on December. He died December the 25th, 2005, aged 23. Right, so back to Terry Gregory. On the night of Saturday, the 27th of December 2003, Terry, his girlfriend Louise Reed, and his friend Sam Nelson went to the Pullman pub in Woolwich for a night out. They were probably all quite merry by the time they left, catching the N1 bus to where they all lived in Charlton. Crucially, there was no CCTV footage available, although all buses have got the cameras, but again, that seems to be the case when you could do with the CCTV coverage. It never seems to be there, does it? Terry felt sick while they were on the bus, so they got off so that he could get some air. There was an umbrella lying around at the bus stop, which Terry started fooling around with. He was soon confronted by a black man who claimed it as belonging to one of his 3 female companions. A scuffle ensued in which Terry, being the younger, fitter man, unfortunately, seems to have got the better of his antagonist. Some Asian men stopped in a car and seemed to have been successful in diffusing the situation as the black man and his companions got on a bus and disappeared. Terry and his friends continued walking home along Woolwich Church Street, thinking that was the end of it. But as they approached the Albion pub, about half a mile from Terry's home, the black man from the umbrella incident reappeared. In the following minutes, Sam Nelson sustained a knife wound in his hand, and Terry, in attempting to protect his friend, who was smaller than him, was stabbed 9 times, including twice in the back. Terry was rushed to hospital but didn't survive. A description of a man wanted for questioning was circulated, and on the 30th of December, 65-year-old George Edwin of Marion Road, Charlton, gave himself up at Shooters Hill Police Station. He was charged with Terry's murder and GBH in relation to Sam Nelson. The CPS were obviously confident in a murder charge as opposed to manslaughter, as the evidence showed clear premeditation. And you know what that is, a time lapse between the original altercation and the fact that the defendant reappeared armed with a knife. The first trial in August 2004, the defendant, George Edwin, admitted Terry had wound him up during the umbrella incident, and when he saw the three friends again, he supposedly feared for his life. He feared he would be attacked. He claimed this second encounter was near Prospect Vale and not the Albion, and in my opinion, this was done in order to give the impression that the other three had followed him, as this would be nearer his home in Marion Road, whereas the Albion was nearer to Terry's. Not only did Edwin admit to being in possession of a knife, he went as far as admitting drawing the knife, but supposedly to frighten off his would-be assailants. He denied stabbing Terry. Edwin had no criminal convictions, and it was easy for the defence to portray this supposed law-abiding pensioner as the victim rather than the aggressor. The jury in this first trial were unable to reach a majority verdict on the murder charge and were dismissed, and a new trial was ordered. Somebody said something about double jeopardy to me, but this is outside of the remit because there wasn't a verdict, there wasn't an acquittal, whatever. Anyway, so the second trial commenced on the 21st of October 2004. On this occasion, the jury visited the scene of the crime by the Albion pub. This pub, as one would expect from its name, boasts a sign depicting Winston Churchill in the guise of John Bull, complete with the Union Jack waistcoat. There was also a wreath lying nearby in the style of the Union Jack, which had been placed there not by the NF, as was said, but by a local lady who knew Terry. Terry had been a sports fanatic, and this was not long after the Olympics and the Olympic winners' victory tour through London. Now, we all know that sports merchandising is full of Union Jacks. The NF had laid a wreath at the scene of the crime earlier on in January 2004, which again tragically served only to strengthen the defence's claim of possible racist connections for the Gregory family. Needless to say, on returning to court, the seeds would have been well and truly sown in the minds of the jurors that this was perhaps a racist enclave. There was the mention of the proximity to where Stephen Lawrence was killed. It's the same borough, but it's not that close. So he should have been challenged. That shouldn't. The character of the victim was sullied when, there was no one there to defend him. It's almost okay for a black to kill a white if the victim has been portrayed as a racist. If I were to be murdered, regardless of motive, whoever would murder me would have a cast iron stay out of jail card, because no doubt my BNP membership would be dragged into it, and the assailant would have to be the victim, because the victim had it coming or must have done something to antagonise the person. Why was the defence lawyer allowed to make the connection that this was not far from where Stephen Lawrence was murdered, as though to infer that it was acceptable to overlook white victims, as all whites in this part of Greenwich must be racist and it's okay to murder racists? It was easy also for the defence to demolish unsophisticated witnesses like Terry's friend Sam Nelson and his girlfriend Louise Reid, who was 16 at the time, and then to attack their conflicting evidence Louise had been so traumatised by the first trial that she chose to give evidence by video link in the second trial. This time round, Edwin claimed not to remember much of what happened that night. He responded, "To my knowledge, I never stabbed that boy. I am not a murderer. I am not a killer." His performance and the underhand tactics of his defence were obviously sufficient to convince the jury, despite the damning evidence. I find it unbelievable that you can have a defendant who admits to both having the knife and drawing it, but whose memory then fails at the crucial moment. Did the jury believe that someone else intervened at this point and stabbed Terry 9 times? On this occasion, again, this is most odd. On this occasion, the jury found Edwin not guilty on the GBH charge relating to Sam Nelson, but again could not reach a verdict in relation to the murder charge. Now, that seems odd. If he was not guilty in relation to the one, then you'd imagine he's not guilty in relation to the other. You know, someone else is not going to step in. No, oh, look, I've stabbed him. Someone else comes in and stabs the other person. You know. Right. So after deliberation, the CPS said that they did not intend to seek a third trial. On the 3rd of November 2004, the judge dismissed the murder charge, declaring George Edwin not guilty and saying, "You leave this court without a stain upon your character." Yeah. As you can imagine, the Gregory family were devastated, and they just couldn't believe it, and neither could I when I read it. It is possible that the jury was split over whether it was a case of murder or manslaughter, not as to the defendant's innocence of either. The second jury, again, this is my opinion, the second jury should have been directed by the judge to reach a majority verdict on either murder or manslaughter, but it seems that our antiquated judicial system doesn't allow for that. It's quite possible that George Edwin walked free when both juries believed him guilty and were only split between those believing it was murder and those thinking it was manslaughter. Thus, a man who admits to carrying a large bladed weapon and is not averse to drawing it when crossed was allowed to walk free. The police didn't even charge him with the lesser crime of carrying a bladed weapon, because obviously he was facing a much more serious charge. In January 2005, the NF planned another wreath-laying ceremony preceded by a march. UAF came out in force with Stop the Fascist BNP banners. Peter Blexley, in his book, and I'll talk a bit about this later as well, mentions the NF having very short haircuts. I mean, you know, and some having their faces covered with scarves. Now, I don't believe that, because it's usually UAF or, you know, Hope Not Hate who have scarves over their faces, not any nationalists. I'd like to highlight the difference in outcomes for the two mothers. Doreen Lawrence feted in the media a whole pack of lawyers at her disposal and then a seat in the House of Lords. Her son's name constantly mentioned by the media and in Parliament. Not content with the existing memorials, there's now to be an annual Stephen Lawrence Day, and there's also a petition for a statue in Trafalgar Square. So, that's Doreen Lawrence. So Sue Gregory, ignored by the media, no lawyers coming forward to help her in her fight against a patent miscarriage of justice. Her sons, and I'm talking about her sons, both of them now, her son's name's forgotten, save for on the Patriots' fallen list. Greenwich Council, the Gregorys lived in a council house near the scene of the crime. The defendant lived in a council house near the scene of the crime. So Greenwich Council, dragged their feet in rehousing the Gregory family. And Sue Gregory told me she would regularly come face to face with her son's killer while she was walking into Woolwich. It's my opinion that juries generally, and certainly for murder trials, are no longer fit for purpose. They worked when we were a homogenous people being tried by 12 of our peers, but now with multiculturalism and all sorts of other identities involved, race, religion, I've got sexual orientation here, that comes into it. It's not part of multiculturalism, but it's, another identity. I actually read about the Gregory murder in the local paper in early 2004, I think, and I couldn't believe it that someone would murder someone because of an umbrella. I then came across the story of the trial and the acquittal, and the man who had almost certainly murdered Terry walking free from the court. My own son at the time was a teenager, and I just felt, that could be me. I could be in that position. The whole thing struck me as a grave miscarriage of justice. Having seen on more than one occasion as a juror the injustice of our legal system, I eventually walked out of a jury trial in August 2004 and got fined for contempt of court. I actually met with Sue Gregory because I thought I've got to go around to find this woman and commiserate with her. So I knocked on her door. I just wanted to tell her that I would try whatever I could do to bring the case to people's notice. Actually, when I called her son Billy, this is the one that was killed, the second son. He actually remembered reading about me in the same paper, the News Shopper, about me walking out of the jury trial. Of course, Billy himself would be dead within a year as well. In offering to try and help Sue Gregory, I haven't got any power, but I can write I can write letters, and I can fire off emails, which is what I did. And I joined forces with someone else. Stuart Rigby was a friend of Terry's from his time as a lifeguard at Eltham Baths, and Stuart had actually sat through both trials, so I didn't, so he could help me with that. He had written to his local MP and also Baroness Scotland, who was the Attorney General at the time. She subsequently has fallen from grace as well. Sort of cash for honours type thing and bullying and the usual sort of stuff. I wrote to several journalists who I thought were in a position to perhaps take up the case and give it wider exposure. People like Simon Jenkins, Peter Hitchens, Joshua Rosenberg. Not one of them expressed an interest. Simon Jenkins had himself written a lengthy article in the Times calling for the abolition of the jury system. Having served as a juror on 3 occasions, Jenkins, like me, felt that juries were time-wasting, inefficient, and expensive. He argued that jury justice is largely guesswork. as they are denied crucial pieces of evidence. I'm not saying that happened in the Terry Gregory case, but that is a case. Juries will agonise over their decision on serious cases, expecting a guilty verdict to attract a prison sentence, which seems to very rarely follow. And that certainly was Jenkins and my experience. Evidence of guilt in the Gregory case seems to have been conclusive. However, this trial was conducted amid blatant pleas to emotion and prejudice, when the jury are expected to make a decision based solely on the evidence. Jurors are somehow expected to behave not like human beings. The judge in both trials should have intervened to stop the defence resorting to smear tactics against the victim, and inferences that perhaps he and his friend Sam were part of a white gang culture. Juries are all too easily swayed, especially if race is involved. And again, I know this from my own experience. I believe that if George Edwin had appeared in front of a panel of judges, he would have been found guilty. Through my association with Stuart Rigby, I was approached by undercover detective turned author Peter Blexley, and you might have seen him. He's currently hosting Hunted, the sort of reality show on Channel 4. He was researching a book that he was writing at the time called 10 Most Wanted, which is about 10 unsolved murders, of which Terry Gregory's was one. He interviewed me for his chapter on the Gregorys, on the Gregory case, in light of my jury experience. He didn't actually say anything about the fact that I was already speaking to Sue Gregory, and I was trying to get exposure for the, you know, the whole case really. But then when Stuart and Peter heard that I was a BNP member, they both ostracised me and refused to speak to me to this day. I believe the Terry Gregory case should be re-examined under the police's increasingly successful cold case review process. Again, you've probably seen that, is it? New Tricks, you know, on TV thing. So they are increasingly, you know, doing things like that. Obviously, there'd have to be new evidence, but, you know, when they wanted to retry it, the people in the Lawrence case, they made sure there was new evidence.
Yeah, 18 years old, the evidence, and they found the smallest dot of blood and said, oh yeah, linked it to it.
Yeah. So
that's a miscarriage of justice.
Is this asking too much when there's probably a police team still investigating the Stephen Lawrence case after 26 years? So.
Well done, Roberta. Don't go away, don't go running off. There might be some questions. Do we know the composition of the jury at all?
Well, I had loads of questions for Stuart Rigby, and because he attended both the trials. So, as I say, I was heavily involved in this for a period of time. I then stopped, and now I just, you know, I rang him again recently because I thought, oh, sometimes elapsed. He's probably nearer 80. He might have mellowed a bit, but no, he hasn't. You know, and he should know
the composition of the jury. Okay.
Well,
we need.
No,
I think, you know,
no, we don't know.
There's a school of thought, isn't there, that if the jury is made up of their own kind, you know, getting a conviction can be a bit tougher. Has anyone else got a question? Gregory case, because it was an incredible miscarriage of justice.
Did you say the killer was 65?
Yeah, 65 at the time, yeah.
Even elderly bikes are carrying these now, so.
He went home to get a knife.
Oh, I see.
He went home to, and the attack he perpetrated was savage. It was knife.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Yeah, it was
you know,
not
it wasn't
knife,
a one-off.
yeah, yeah.
He savagely
Yeah,
stabbed
yeah.
him.
Yeah.
That was that
And
came
he's-
across at the.
He can't say it was out of emotion because it was delayed emotion.
Absolutely, it's an incredible. He should have been found guilty of murder. It's unbelievable that he wasn't.
But it's not what you would expect of
Yeah.
a 65-year-old.
Just another point,
So-
you mentioned Baroness Scotland.
Yeah.
She is a full-blooded African woman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
You know,
We want to stick to the Gregory thing. Sorry. Yeah. Did you go for
So, who did they think stabbed this young man? How did they...
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's unbelievable, isn't it? The fact he said, yes, he had the knife, he drew the knife, but then conveniently his mind's gone blank. So,
You're still unsolved. Technically, it's still unsolved. They found him guilty.
Yes.
It's still unsolved.
yeah.
technically?
Which is why I'm saying it should be re-examined.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what happened with the mother? Is she still alive?
Well, the mother, again, I contacted her recently. Now, you know, she's not ostracised me. I think she realises that, you know, I'm not doing it for my own benefit or even for
Political.
BNP or whoever. And I think when I first contacted her, I don't think I was a member. And I certainly didn't contact her as a member of the BNP. I did it as a mother. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good for you.
What was the knife that the defendant had? Was that the murder weapon?
Sorry?
It
The
was.
knife that the guy went home and...
Yes, it was the
that
murder weapon. It was the murder
It was the
weapon.
murder weapon.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Forensic
I don't think
proved
it
that.
Yeah.
was produced in the court.
Forensics
Forensics
proved that was the
that
murder
was the murder
weapon.
weapon, yeah. Okay.
That's why it was an incredible
Absolutely,
miscarriage.
yeah.
Thank you.